The GP in the Netherlands has just finished, and while it wasn't the most eventful one, it's shown us that Red Bull has truly lost what they had in the beginning of the season. Lando Norris just won the race by the biggest gap we've had so far in the 2024 season, which was 22.8 seconds. Max was nowhere near and never had the pace to truly fight with Lando. The Red Bull team did something different, even reverted back to old parts for this GP. But we have to talk about what's going on with this Red Bull squad because it's been downgrades after downgrades. They haven't won a GP since Spain, and even arguably there, the McLaren was the faster car. They were close in some GPs like the British GP where they nailed a strategy, but everything seems to be falling apart right now with team principals leaving over the summer break like Jonathan Wheatley. And the demeanor of the team has completely changed. Even through the radio message we heard at the end of this GP, you could see that everybody was down from this P2, and it seems like it's only getting worse. Before getting into the bigger part of the video, I wanted to thank you guys for the support. Missed you very dearly. Thank you for support on the last video. If you're new here, please go ahead and like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me and really helps out the channel. But let's get into why the Red Bull car is falling back so badly. Quickly debriefing the GP, we had Lando starting in P1 and Max in P2. And from what we've seen in previous GPs, I think we all suspected Max to start off in P1 by the end of lap 1. That's exactly what happened. Down the inside Max goes, gets Lando pretty easily, might I add. And now we get to see if Max can truly make a gap. And while it does kind of start that way with Max making about a 1.5 second gap, which kept Lando out of the DRS, there weren't any more significant gains for Max, and he really wasn't able to pull away like he usually does. George made a couple of places which put Oscar Piastri back. We'll talk about Mercedes a little bit as well. But Leclerc also had a good jump and got ahead of Checo. We'll definitely have to mention Leclerc, who had an outstanding race. Carlos was also making up a good amount of places. Here's him passing Fernando on lap 9. Wasn't Fernando's best race if you ask me, but the Aston Martin car is far from optimal as well. Lewis ended up coming back starting on the soft after having a pretty weird qualifying considering Lewis's recent form has been outstanding and more like the past Lewis that we all know, but this wasn't one of those GPs and it just kind of seemed like an off weekend for him, even though in the race it wasn't too bad. On lap 17 is where we can truly start talking about Red Bull and McLaren and what's going on. Lap 17, the battle for P1 starts and Max is able to actually defend him for one lap, but on the next lap Lando gets him pretty easily, and while Max did make a mistake on lap 17 which put Lando in the position to actually go for the overtake, it was clear that the McLaren car had the pace. Whether that be in the straight line or any of the corners in Zandvoort, it was always the McLaren's strength. There was only one section of track where the Red Bull was actually able to show off some pace, and that was the start of Sector 2, but as soon as we start going into the end of Sector 2 and start of Sector 3, this is really where we're going to go over about the weaknesses about Red Bull and the problem with the car that is more than just curbs. This RB20 is significantly worse than their predecessor of the RB19, which was strung everywhere. We started seeing the gap open by this time period, and from pretty much lap 20 to 72, there aren't too many significant moments for me to now just talk about the race as a whole. It was pretty much a stalemate. Lando was making a bigger gap. They do end up pitting at some points, but Max was never able to catch him. The star points I do want to talk about before getting more into Red Bull is that Leclerc had an outstanding race and kept himself in DRS range of Piastri even in the beginning of the race, which ended up resulting in Leclerc finishing on the podium due to being able to get a undercut on lap 24 and 25, which then gave him the lead over Piastri, and he was able to keep it and defend it. And obviously Oscar had the faster car, which made this just even more impressive. The Red Bull team even tries going for an undercut, does not work because at this point Lando pretty much made a 8-second gap, and the rest is history amongst the two of them. There was a funny shot of 5 cars going into turn 1 because K-Mag took the last corner very slowly. I'm not sure if that was purposeful or he was just really out of tires. I remember actually seeing the tires, they were pretty shred up, but not to the point where you need to slow down so significantly to where 5 cars are now intertwined in this battle. It was pretty dangerous, that's why Alex was talking about it. Our finishing classification was Lando in first, Verstappen in second, Leclerc in P3, Piastri was not able to make up that P4, Sainz came all the way to P5, Checo ended up getting P6, but this is due to Russell and Hamilton going on some weird two-stop strategies. I'm not sure whether the team was planning on that being faster or George had a problem, because there was no point why George pitted when he did. But it was a simply lovely race by Lando. The team just added upgrades to their front and rear suspension, just optimizing that aerodynamic package. And as I've stated in my upgrades video before, the team has really focused on rear downforce, and the rear wing and beam wing towards the rear part of the car has just been a focal point on why this McLaren MCL38 has been super strong. The overall package is just good everywhere, whether it be in the straight line or in any of the corners on any track. I would not doubt them being the fastest on every other track we have, because they're able to take the curbs correctly, and with them being able to optimize the rear part of the car while the platform is still stable, I don't see why they're not the favorites now going into Monza. But the biggest changing point for Red Bull, and where it's all started to go wrong, was the British GP. As I stated, since that GP, they have not won a race. They won their last race in Spain, with Max having a pretty good, comfortable lead. He was able to make that gap, but his tires were getting torn apart by the end of the GP, while McLaren was still faster, and they didn't realize yet that they actually had the fastest car. Naturally, as Lando gets more in the rhythm of leading a race, it will now be a bigger problem for Max. And while he does have to win every single race with the fastest lap, if Max finishes all those races in P2 for him to actually win the championship, it's not realistic to say that Max will finish P2 every single time in these races, as Oscar Piastri is very close. But with that being the quickest car, there is a possibility of Lando winning all those races just like Max did in the beginning of the season. The team actually used a reverted floor. I'm shocked to say this because it was talked about so much on how Aston Martin was using old parts and bringing them in with the new, how it was pathetic of the team, and now we see the team that dominated 22 and 23 actually doing the same strategy, but it not paying off. It seems like the team is pretty certain that the problem lies into the floor. They changed on Max's car back all the way to the Bahrain spec, while Checo ran the newest floor spec. Now, Checo didn't have his worst GP, but I wouldn't call it his greatest yet either. While Checo wasn't in a different planet, the pace was still pretty far off, and Max was definitely the reason why they were able to finish P2 in what could have been maybe even the third fastest car, as Leclerc was only 3 seconds behind by the end of the race on tires that were pretty much nowhere, meaning that the Red Bull has no tires either. And why this is so significant is because this is what's making up the actual problems in the car. It's that the tires are not heating up correctly in the race, and now understeer has become an inherent problem. As you can see, with Max taking turn 10, he cannot turn that car at all. And now this is not just one video clip. You can probably pull up 50 of those clips in the race, lap by lap, of him not being able to turn in that car significantly while also tearing up the tires because the car will just not turn in. Before, we used to relate the RB20 problems to just curbs, and while there are some curbs here in Zandvoort, the car genuinely was not turning and understeer was a big problem, which means the front of the car wasn't biting. And as Max stated before, even in Hungary, he's been trying to change the brake bias on the car to make it a more oversteery car, but the car just isn't able to do that because the grip of the tires isn't sticking to the ground. Helmut Marko has now gone on record and said that they are going to now revert even more of this car and try and bring in new and old specs to see what works. Checo was also running the old wing, mind you, with the new floor, and still, yet again, they don't look like the fastest car. Even if Max was put in that car, I don't think it would have helped that much more significantly. This car now also goes against Max's driver preferences, but he's still able to drive the hell out of it. While it was a P2, it was a very commendable one because there were faster cars behind him. He was able to make up that gap anyways and control the rest of his race. I wonder if he had to push, would he have actually had any tires by the end of the race, and would he have even been able to make that one stop work, because he was falling back very badly trying to preserve what he had left. With tracks like Baku and Singapore coming with huge curbs, big braking zones, I really think that this RB20 could end up actually finishing in P5, even in the hands of Max, with cars like Mercedes and Ferrari following very closely behind. And while Mercedes didn't have the greatest race, The McLaren is by far the fastest, and this will only continue by the end of the year, with McLaren probably getting even stronger and Red Bull having to make up a gap, which just won't happen up until 2025. So there is chance of a drivers, very little, but constructors is definitely going to go to McLaren with the pace that's happening, and with Checo in that second seat, it's hard to think that this McLaren team won't finish up P1. If you guys did enjoy the video, please give it a like and subscribe. It would mean the world, and peace.